Welcome to the Chosen podcast. I'm Jake.
And I'm Jess.
You know that feeling when you've poured absolutely everything into something only to watch it just crumble? And you feel completely overlooked, maybe even like God's not even watching. Well, that raw feeling, that real human experience of isolation when things fall apart is pretty central to this deep dive we're starting right now. So welcome. We're taking a really close look today at season 2, episode 2 of The Chosen, the one titled I Saw You. And we've got this great stack of source material here that really digs into this specific episode. It explores the new disciples coming in, the group dynamics, and loads of rich biblical and cultural context. Our goal is to pull out the key insights, understand these characters, their journeys, and unpack the history and scripture woven in. Basically, a shortcut to being well-informed about this episode. And this one, right from the start, brings in two really key figures, Nathanael and Philip.
Right? And it shows Jesus meeting people exactly where they are, often, like you said, right at their lowest points. So let's get into it. Nathanael first. Looking at the sources, Nathanael's story is incredibly striking. He's shown as this passionate architect devoted to God, with big dreams of building synagogues. Not just buildings, but places for worship. But then, the sources detail how this dream just completely collapses. His big project fails, despite everything he put in. The language used in the material is pretty strong, talking about the death of his dream, his career ruined. One source even brings up the idea that maybe he felt it died from hubris, that excessive pride, a classic downfall. This leads him to a moment of just profound despair. The sources really focus on this. He walks off alone, finds a solitary fig tree, a place for privacy, maybe reflection, and he's wrestling with God from this place of total brokenness. You really feel the weight of it. He's got his architectural drawings. He's reciting prayers like the Shema.
But it's that raw cry from Psalm 102 that just hits hardest. Do not hide your face from me. Do you see me? It's that core question. Am I unseen in this, my absolute lowest moment? And the sources point out the symbolism in his actions too, like burning the plans, putting ashes on his head, tearing his clothes. These aren't just random dramatic gestures. They're recognized mourning rituals in that culture, signaling that his dream, maybe his whole identity, felt dead to him. And here's where the sources add a fascinating layer. They connect this scene of Nathanael under the fig tree directly to the show's creator, Dallas Jenkins, and his own experience with a huge professional failure, a film project that left him feeling ruined, questioning if God saw him. The sources suggest that personal connection really fuels the rawness we see in Nathanael. So how does Jesus enter this picture then? Because that's the turning point.
Well, it absolutely is. Jesus encounters Nathanael. Philip brings him. It seems like their first meeting. But the sources emphasize before Nathanael even explains himself. Jesus says, "Here is a true Israelite in whom there is no deceit." Just like that. Incredible insight, isn't it? And the sources highlight the contrast. The name Jacob, Israel's patriarch, literally means deceiver. So Jesus is immediately seeing past the ruin, affirming Nathanael's core character, even before revealing anything else. But the moment that just shatters Nathanael's world, the trigger for that immediate belief, is when Nathanael asks, "How do you know me?" And Jesus' reply is the key. the hinge point according to the sources. Jesus says, "When you were in your lowest moment and you were alone, I did not turn my face from you. I saw you under the fig tree." He didn't just see him, he saw him in that private, hidden place of despair.
Exactly. And the sources stress it's that specific, intimate knowledge of his deepest vulnerability that just removes all doubt. No debate. Nathanael's response is instant. Rabbi, you're the Son of God, the King of Israel. Total conviction. And the redemption arc completes when Jesus then affirms Nathanael's original passion. The sources mention Jesus acknowledging his desire to help build something that would bring souls closer to God and advises him to start tomorrow. The implication drawn out really powerfully in this material is that his skills, the very ones tied to his ruined dream, aren't wasted. They'll be used in a new redemptive way. So he goes from feeling unseen and ruined to profoundly seen and called. That's quite an entrance. Now, the sources also introduce Philip, and his story offers a different angle on being called. He arrives from the Bashan region.
Right? And the sources explain this isn't just some random place. It was known historically as the Kingdom of Og, apparently quite fertile. It might imply something about his background or perspective. And unlike some others who seem called out of nowhere, Philip has history. The sources say he knew John the Baptist. He was a former disciple of John's, and he already knew Andrew. So it shows there were different paths to Jesus. Some people were kind of prepared by John's ministry beforehand, but his arrival isn't totally smooth. The existing disciples are a bit wary. The sources quote Simon being suspicious and John noting, "No one just walks in the Bashan." You get that immediate sort of outsider dynamic. But Philip asks for Andrew, which helps smooth things over, shows he's not a complete stranger. And the sources characterize Philip in interesting ways, describing him as more awake compared to others, perhaps suggesting his time with John gave him a deeper readiness. And crucially, he's portrayed as someone who gets what it feels like to be an outsider, which becomes important later. His calling itself is very direct.
Very. The sources highlight that simultaneous exchange. Jesus says, "Follow me." Philip instantly says, "I will." No hesitation shown there. He seems ready. He clearly sees Jesus as the one the Messiah John was preparing for. There's also that brief interaction where Philip asks about going towards Syria and makes that comment about Jesus and John having a death wish, a bit of his personality showing through. And Jesus' response is interesting too. The sources note Jesus calls Philip the most experienced of all my followers at that point, maybe reflecting that time with John. So that brings us to a really key relationship that starts forming, Philip and Matthew. The sources highlight this quite a bit. We've already seen the tension around Matthew, especially Simon's distrust because of his past. And the sources show Philip just stepping right into that situation. He sees Matthew's isolation. The material describes him as outside the circle.
And Philip just reaches out, offers practical help like drying wood, simple kindness. And their conversation, according to these sources, is incredibly insightful. Philip makes this really powerful point to Matthew about identity, that whole "I am is all that matters" thing. He says people want to define you by past sins, but with the Messiah, your identity now is what counts. Who you are in Christ, basically, not your history. That's huge for Matthew. And Philip connects with him by sharing his own feeling of being outside the circle back when he was with John. He gets that feeling. So he's not just preaching. He's relating and encouraging him with simple stuff like, "You're fine. Stick around. You're going to be all right." Just basic kindness and affirmation. which then opens the door for Matthew to share his deepest insecurity about not having religious schooling, feeling unworthy because he didn't attend Hebrew school. That lack of traditional knowledge. He feels he doesn't know enough.
And Philip's response is just perfect based on the sources. He tells Matthew, essentially, it doesn't matter what you know or don't know. What matters is that Jesus chose you, redefining his worth entirely based on Jesus' call. So this friendship forming between these two outsiders, Philip and Matthew, is seen as a really positive thing in the group dynamics, a needed connection. And speaking of group dynamics, we definitely see some tensions bubbling up as the group grows, especially with Simon. He's clearly wrestling with the complexity. The sources detail his worry about Matthew writing things down. He sees it as a risk, spying, words being twisted, that old distrust. It brings that right back to the surface. And he also floats the idea for a hierarchy, doesn't he? Putting himself and Big James at the top.
Yeah. The sources frame that as Simon trying to bring some structure, manage things, make sure instructions get followed, especially when Jesus isn't right there. It feels very human, trying to apply familiar organizational ideas to something totally new and, well, divine, thinking like a manager maybe, focused on control perhaps, more than the unique mission. And how does Jesus handle this very understandable concern for order? Well, the sources highlight his approach, gentle but firm. He affirms Matthew's writing, says it's good. But on the hierarchy, he pushes back a bit, emphasizes that everyone he called is chosen, everyone has a purpose. Every voice must be heard. Valuing each person over rigid structure right now. And there's that counterintuitive bit. The sources mention Jesus suggesting if someone seems to be slowing things down, maybe Simon needs to slow down.
That challenges Simon's whole idea of efficiency. It does, but he also reassures Simon that structure will be needed one day. He acknowledges the need eventually, but signals he'll guide that process. Not Simon right now. This touches on that whole concept of timing, something else Jesus discusses with Simon, the word soon. The sources really emphasize how Jesus points out the imprecision of soon, both in human terms and especially divine terms. One source connects it directly to that verse in 2 Peter about a day being like 1,000 years to the Lord. That's the one. With the Lord, a day is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years are like a day. Jesus' point to Simon, as the sources frame it, is pretty powerful. Ask my Father in heaven how long 1,000 years is, then talk to me about soon. Wow, a perspective shift. God's timeline is just vast, completely different.
And the sources also do a great job pulling out some specific cultural and biblical details that add extra layers of meaning. Like that moment, the disciples quote Ezekiel 39 after Matthew finds the wet wood. The sources explain this isn't random. It's a prophecy about Israel burning enemy weapons for fuel someday, a symbol of God's ultimate victory and provision. And them quoting it together shows their shared hope in those messianic times. Then you hear greetings like Shalom, Shalom. The sources point out that repetition matters in Hebrew. Doubling shalom, which means peace, wholeness, completion, isn't just casual. It intensifies the blessing profoundly, like praying for extreme peace and well-being. Then there's Nathanael's first reaction to Jesus being from Nazareth. Can anything good come out of Nazareth? The sources explain that reflects how lowly Nazareth was regarded then. Insignificant. Not where you'd expect the Messiah to come from. And Philip's simple reply, come and see, just cuts through the prejudice, invites personal experience.
And what about Nathanael's phrase, cold day in Gehenna? Yes, the sources clarify that. It's like a Jewish idiom, similar to our cold day in hell. but they're careful to distinguish Gehenna, historically the Valley of Hinnom. In Jewish thought, it's often seen as a place of temporary, refining punishment, not quite the eternal concept often associated with hell. And there was also context on Philip the Tetrarch, the brother of Herod, Antipas, the one Caesarea Philippi is named after. The sources link him to that whole volatile political situation, especially connecting back to John the Baptist, confronting Herod's family about the unlawful marriage, which led to John's imprisonment. It all connects. So, pulling back then, looking at all these insights, what's the big picture emerging? Well, the sources consistently show Jesus actively seeking people out, meeting individuals right where they are, especially in those moments of pain or vulnerability, like Nathanael, feeling unseen.
And he calls people from unexpected places, like Philip, who was already seeking, but also values and brings in the outsiders, like Matthew, fostering connections that maybe wouldn't happen otherwise. And within the group, he's navigating those very real human tensions, the desire for control, for structure, gently guiding them towards his way, prioritizing each person's calling over that immediate, rigid hierarchy Simon wanted. So the core message that really echoes through all this material is pretty powerful, I think. Jesus sees us. He sees us in our deepest needs, even when we feel hidden or defined by failure. And he doesn't just dismiss our pasts or our seemingly broken skills. He can redeem them, use them for things we couldn't imagine, inviting us to build something new with him. It's about understanding that being chosen by him becomes the defining truth. More than our history, more than labels others might put on us.
So here's something maybe for you, the listener, to take away from this deep dive. Thinking about these themes, being seen, getting past old definitions, where in your own life do you maybe feel overlooked or defined by a past failure or limitation?
Jess. And how might those experiences, those setbacks, maybe look different if you saw them from a perspective that meets you right there and wants to redeem everything? What does it look like for you, right where you are today, to truly come and see?
Thank you so much for joining us in this incredible deep dive. Keep those questions coming, keep analyzing, keep diving deep, and most importantly, keep watching. Until next time.